Big loss in wrestling this week. Terry Funk died a couple days ago. Guys, why don't you share some Terry Funk stories, thoughts?
Since we've had this show, I've talked almost about nauseum, almost probably, how much Flair and Funk was one of my favorite all-time feuds in '89. It's ironic because even before Funk's death this week, I stumbled upon a video of him in his first debut in the WWF at the time, where he starts beating up the ring attendant who basically put on his cowboy hat. It was always interesting to me because that was the first time I saw Terry. He just something about Terry Funk drew you in. Like I didn't even, as a kid, I don't know what's going on, but there's something to draw me in. To the point I thought about this week. I've mentioned before, AJ knows this about Kamala, Abdullah the Butcher, guys that scared me because of appearance. There were 3 guys on the top of my list who didn't necessarily, they didn't look like a savage, but the way they talked and the way they acted and the way they carried themselves made them scary.
Brian Adias.
Dr. D. David Schultz, Rowdy Piper, and Terry Funk. There was just something about Funk, the way he talked. You go back to those old TNT segments with Vince and Lord Alfred Hayes, and they're in some like bar where it's supposed to be kind of fun. And it's the way Funk talks to Alfred Hayes. There's a little racial tones too during Funk around this time, but he's a scary, scary man. The way he was very believable.
The thing about Terry Funk's character is that he added those racial tones in there because it was part of the character. I want to be clear about something. Terry Funk, through the years, worked with many African-American talents, worked with promotions all around the world. He was big in Japan, wrestled in Puerto Rico, throughout a lot of different areas. And one of the things he was always known for was being a part of the locker room and being somebody always willing to help everybody. My first memories of Terry Funk are a little bit different. I do remember that time that Dave was talking about, but the first time I ever saw Terry Funk was actually going against Dusty Rhodes in Florida Championship Wrestling. And he was playing a maniac already. Don't get me wrong. He was playing the same character that he was playing in the WWE. But it was more of just that Funk versus Rhodes, Texas versus Texas feud.
I think probably, if not the first time that I saw Terry Funk was in WWE, it was on the ICP's Stranglemania tapes. And even though the tapes are hilarious with the commentary they do, watching Terry Funk in these very extreme, bloody matches, he was kind of like the forefather of that overly extreme style that we have now.
He was the first person I saw ever use a table the way that we use it now. When he attempted to put Ric Flair through the table, at that point they did not know that it's a good idea to pre-break tables, and hence them both bouncing off of the table and probably causing more damage than they needed to.
I just watched that this morning. That was disgusting. And even Jim Ross talking about Ric Flair's neck going to the side and really selling it. And I mean, well,
especially those
about that angle. How
we got to remember, those of us who were fans in that era too, we were all well aware of the fact that Ric Flair had come back from a broken back from an airplane crash.
Right.
So to now have his neck possibly broken in this angle, it was absolutely terrifying as a young child.
Realism. We talked about it before. That angle. How many times, I'll give you 2 points. How many times did, when you were a kid, your mom tell you, don't play with plastic bags. Don't put plastic bags on your face. You know, you're going to suffocate. Terry Funk took a plastic bag, wrapped it around Ric Flair's head, and they had to point they actually had to apologize for this afterwards on WCW Saturday Night.
Well,
later
one of the things,
famous I Quit match. I was just going to say, AJ, real quick. I remember when they have the microphone, which was such a great touch and revolutionary for the time. Funk is slapping Ric Flair in the head before he pile drives him and says, you remember your neck, Flair? You remember your neck? You remember the crash? All very real, and Funk talks about that in his book, where it's all about doing that little thing to make you doubt whether this is real or not.
Well, another thing is that one of the most annoying things being a wrestling fan is that every person who's not a wrestling fan thinks they're a genius, and the first thing they want to tell you is that, you know, it's not real, right?
Right.
And that's always a fun conversation. But when you watch an angle like that and that belief, or that, hey, I know this isn't real, goes away, That's the magic of wrestling, and that's the magic of Terry Funk. You never knew with Terry Funk. You could never say that's not real. No matter where he wrestled, no matter what he was doing, whether you were terrified he was going to hurt Hulk Hogan, whether you were terrified he was going to hurt the Junkyard Dog, Ric Flair, not once did anybody ever go, that shit's not real.
Right.
He was an innovator of wrestling, not only in the United States, but also in Japan.
For
He's a
sure.
wrestling god in Japan.
Yeah, one of the most famous. When you look at the top, I was just listening. I think W.H. Park talked about this on Post Wrestling. When you look, he'd say probably top three, like Brody, Hansen, Funk are probably like your most famous American wrestlers in Japan.
I mean, I hate to say it, but it's actually the Funk brothers that are huge in Japan. For some reason, they absolutely loved Dory Funk's style of catch-as-catch-can wrestling. Also, them as a team in Japan are still heralded as one of the greatest teams of all time.
And think about the fact that all those guys that are big in Japan from the United States, from Texas, and I mean, I don't know exactly if the Funks got everybody into Japan, but influential with it. I mean, Dory's still wrestling up until a few years ago over there. Isn't it amazing that Dory Funk is still going and that Terry Funk is gone?
I heard it was actually a work program where West Texas State University used to actually just send wrestlers straight to Japan to work. It's a nice little program.
There was so many, from West Texas State University. Crazy. Dusty, Tully. But
People forget Ted DiBiase.
Sure, we could go on and on. Sure.
Oh, yeah.
And closing too, just about Terry. Other than maybe not even Flair. I can't think of anybody who went to so many different promotions and was on top or, involved. Like you look, Terry was involved in the golden era with Hogan, the attitude era he had with Mick Foley. He was part of that, and then of course the NWA with Flair, the classic NWA where he's having classic matches with Harley Race, all his stuff in Japan. And then what he would do with ECW years later. Like, I can't think of a guy who did more for professional wrestling as a whole than Terry Funk.
And one of the things that's really big in to go along with what you're saying is, to me, there's only two wrestlers left that put an end to our childhood, and that's Hulk Hogan and Ric Flair. Terry Funk is one of those last pieces to an era that unfortunately is going very quickly.